Okay, I will go ahead and start dispensing with the introductions while we let the last few folks trickle in here. But hello, everybody. I'm Kyle Yoder. I'm the Associate Research Director at the Center for Election Innovation and Research, and I am pleased to welcome you to this month's Books and Ballots series. I've got just a few housekeeping notes before we get started for you. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. Books and Ballots first launched 2 years ago as a space where election professionals and researchers could share ideas, lessons learned, and practical insights from across the field. And it's been incredibly rewarding to be a part of this community as it grows and to continue the conversations that strengthen election administration across the country. This year, Books and Ballots has expanded in partnership and available resources. So in addition to these webinars, we now have resources available through Substack and as a podcast on Spotify. If you're listening to us on Spotify, hi there. These efforts are a collaboration between Ready for Tuesday, the Center for Election Innovation and Research, and MIT's Election Data and Science Lab. Through it all, our goal has remained to showcase the most useful research for election officials. So today's Books and Ballots conversation is about the HR of democracy. Elections, as we all know, election offices run on people. Permanent teams, seasonal hires, temporary workers, the surge of poll workers and support staff who carry the office through each election period. Managing that workforce is one of the hardest and least discussed parts of the job, and it's an area where research and practice have a lot to learn from each other. That's part of what the University of Maryland's Election Resilience Lab is built for. Researchers and election officials working side by side to better understand the people side of election administration, from recruitment and retention to training and succession planning. Our conversation today will get into what makes each of those uniquely difficult in this field and what workforce development practices translate from other fields, as well as what doesn't. We'll talk about how research and practice can inform each other in ways that make both stronger. So we'll be sure to leave time at the end for audience questions, so please be sure to use the Q&A feature here on Zoom to submit those as we go. And we are recording today's conversation. Don't worry, we'll share that afterwards. Now I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, TJ Pichet from Ready for Tuesday.
Thanks, Kyle. And I know all of us have been really excited about this conversation and about the report that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about. The team from the Election Resilience Lab at the University of Maryland, alongside their colleagues at the Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement, are some of the, I think, coolest folks that I know in elections. So I'm really excited for this conversation. I'm going to turn it over to quick introductions from our panelists. We've got Alison McLaughlin, no relation, I don't think, to Sarah, Anita Brady, and Lynn Handy. But let's start with Sarah McLaughlin's much cooler cousin, Alison.
Hi, I'm Alison McLaughlin. I'm the director of the Election Resilience Lab, and I'm a former election official.
Anita?
Hi, I'm Anita Brady. I have about 35 years of public sector human resources and workforce development experience, and I'm very happy to be here and work on this project.
Amazing. Lynn?
Hi, my name is Lynn Handy. I'm a senior fellow at the Election Resilience Lab, and I specialize in kind of workforce innovation across the public sector and nonprofit sector.
Amazing, amazing. Well, let's jump right in. We have this excellent report that you all put out, the HR of Democracy report. I understand you went and talked to a lot of election offices and election officials in the lead up to the 2024 general election, and the product that resulted from those conversations was this report. Alison, can you tell us about your work?
Sure. Yeah, we went out to 40, well, we visited on site 30 different election jurisdictions across the country, and then we did remote interviews with another 10. So we had 40 different jurisdictions across the country that the research was based on. And what really generated the report and the research was that so much of what the research that we have right now in the election workforce, or that we've had, has focused a lot on either the election official who is in charge of elections in their jurisdiction, or on the poll workers who are on the front line serving voters at their polling place. But the staff in between, all the sort of connective tissue, the middle managers, the frontline staff, and especially the temporary workers who support elections, haven't really been part of the workforce conversation. And we wanted to document that. So that's what we got by going out and observing in 30 jurisdictions across the country during the presidential election. We had the organizational chart from these jurisdictions, but when you're sitting there observing and you say, who's that guy? What's that person doing over there? You see the extent to which election officials are really borrowing staff from other departments in their government, or they're hiring temporary workers, or there's vendors, there's any number of different sort of creative ways that we meet these seasonal needs to support all of these complex different projects that are going on simultaneously in election. So we wanted to document that, and we wanted to talk, when we start talking about burnout and turnover in elections, and when you start to try to talk about what the solutions are, you quickly get to needing to say, oh, okay, well, if people are undercompensated, what does it take to get a raise in a public sector job? If job descriptions need to be changed, what does that look like? And so that's what this report reveals, and that's what Anita in particular was able to help bring to us, telling the story of kind of the insides of the HR process for elections.
Amazing. Burnover. I think you may have accidentally
Turnover.
coined a new term. That's amazing. Well, knowing that so much of the past work is focused either on, the line level folks who are working at polling places on election day, or the chief election officials, I know of lots of surveys and research that has focused on that population of the workforce. Can you tell us some of the things that surprised you? And this is for any of you. What were your biggest surprises when it came to talking to that kind of team level or temporary level, but not quite a poll worker group of the workforce?
I'll leave that to Anita or Lynn. Lynn, you were coming in from outside elections. Why don't you give your perspective?
Yeah, so I would say when you think about middle management, like they are like across anywhere, they're the unsung heroes who take on a lot of the responsibility, and we see that as well in elections. So they carry a lot of the weight. They also have a lot, like very little autonomy. So they're taking on a lot of responsibility, but also not with a lot of not a lot of control. So it's a tough position, and I think what we really try to do with the report is kind of emphasize these type of leaders and also like resources that can help them kind of do their job, and support them and kind of call out that like reality that they are like very important and visible leaders in this space and in this work.
And
Anita?
my perspective, really from a human resources perspective and workforce development, what stood out to me was how much election employees and staff and that middle group, that middle workforce, was working beyond their formal job description and really doing a lot of things that they knew they were doing, but a lot of people in human resources had no clue. Because many times some of these job descriptions that people were working under were like 20 years old or ancient, or maybe they didn't even have a job description. And so for me in human resources, it was really important to look at that and really reduce the risk. And so that was one of the things that really stood out for me, how people were really working outside, and then people didn't appreciate them as well. They didn't see all the work. They saw the volume, but they didn't see the technical complexity. They didn't see the legal aspects that people were dealing with. They didn't see the public engagement and outreach and a lot of other areas that election officials now have to go and deal with, and the public scrutiny that comes with that as well.
Yeah, and let's talk about that, because in the report you call out those kind of four functional areas where you've got the complexity of the election calendar, and then this is just differences between other kind of parts of government or other roles in government. The standard of perfection that is required, those immovable deadlines, or at least not able to be moved by you deadlines, and then that kind of essential impartiality that you have to convey in a charged environment where, I mean, I don't think it's a surprise everybody's got their own opinions, but as election administrators, they leave that at the door. Uh, Among those four things, or with any of those four things, what do you think is the least understood kind of in the workforce context?
I mean, I would actually say, and because we really talked about this as we were building out this report and in conversations that we had with election officials across the country, like everyone said, hey, our role is different than your typical role in government, but like let's try to make that tangible. And the conversation that Allison and I always had was it's the combination. It's not one of them, but it's all of it at the same time that really equates to something that you don't really see in other government services. And I think that's what people kind of like don't always conceptualize is that this is all happening and it's in combination, and that's what makes it unique and more challenging.
From my perspective, what I think is you've got these immovable deadlines. You've got these legislative regulatory mandates as election officials, and you also have the real time, really quick public scrutiny about these decisions. So elections offices now have to absorb some of these legislative changes very quickly, make these technology changes, deal with a massive amount of change and managing that change, and staffing shortages and staff surging and misinformation and all the pressure that comes with that. And a lot of people who work in other parts of the jurisdictions have no clue about this and about what election officials may do. And so it's almost they need to educate other people in their jurisdiction about how their role has changed over the years.
Allison,
The other
anything?
thing I'll add is that, and I certainly you see as a thread throughout the report our emphasis on surge staffing and the ways that incredible degree of scaling up is such a factor in elections and not generally so much in other areas of government. But I think you hit on it, TJ, when you were talking about the particular type of impartiality that you need to maintain in elections. And I think that's a really important cultural piece of what it means to work in elections. And I also think it's one of the things that makes election officials often their own worst advocate. I think election officials maintain a very important distance. They kind of keep the candidates, keep the politicians at arm's length. And so there's often just not the kind of close relationship that, you might have where somebody who's running a different department of county government, who has a history of working with whoever's, on the county board or the county council, in order to advocate for their own priorities that are often in alignment with, whoever the chief executive is in order to realize their vision for leadership. And elections is different. Elections is often independent. It's kind of off, in a distanced political place where you don't want to have that kind of relationship with either party. And so that sometimes makes it a little bit more challenging for election officials to be bold, to be leaders, to say, I have needs and they need to be met.
That's an interesting call out there, Allison, because I mean, I can imagine at the kind of county policy level with county commissioners, all of them have their areas of interest. You may have a county commissioner who's extremely interested in public works, a county commissioner who's very interested in the environment, whatever it might be. They may actually never really interact closely with those other departments where they don't have an interest or a substantial interest. I mean, election officials are different in that if you're running for office, you in some way have to interact with the election office in your jurisdiction. How do you think election officials can not necessarily take that interaction to, advocate for the complexity of what they do, but what would you hope that every county commissioner could see kind of behind the curtain about the work that election officials do and the complexity associated with it?
Anita, do you want to field that one?
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the most incredible things that I could do as a human resources professional, and I also think any county commissioner should do, is tour an elections office during the middle of election season and understand what the staffing is like, because you may have on an organizational chart, you've got like a couple of people working in your office, but then you come in and you visit that same office during election season, like I had the opportunity, and Lynn and all the other people who worked on this report. It's a totally different mindset, a totally different workflow, organizational structure. And that, to me, is something invaluable, to be able to see people at work, see the election process at work, and see the valuable contributions that all of these folks are making that you would have no clue if you were just like the general public, or even in some instances, county officials.
One of the recommendations in our report speaks to really mapping out the capacity of your office at different moments. You have really functionally a very different organizational chart during the, what we'll call kind of slow or the slower part of the election season. And then you have, when everything's moving fast and furious in the weeks prior to or right after an election. And being able to really articulate that to the people who are on your county board or HR office or budget office is really important, especially for, I think the easiest way that an election official can really get in the way unknowingly of election officials being able to do their job well is with hiring freezes or with budget cuts by a million questions, and the things that prevent election officials from being able to scale up their staffing when they need to in order to hire the right people, in order to get them properly trained and not just be understaffed and scrambling from the get-go. So being able to really sort of focus on that, drawing attention to that, is something that we want to do with this report.
Yeah, and I think Allison, you touched on this, and you just touched on it as well. But that surging piece, right? The fact that, like you and Anita have said, you may have 10 folks on your org chart, and that turns into 200 in the span of 2 weeks, and in many places, perhaps even more. What does it look like to surge well? I think you touched on it, giving enough time to onboard folks, but what are some other aspects of that? And I haven't heard from Lynn, our HR expert extraordinaire, so I'd love to hear from Lynn.
Yes. So I would say the biggest thing about surge staffing and like the challenges is that we saw is that if the lead election official is able to have flexibility in troubleshooting and figuring out how to most effectively surge their office, they're winning because they have someone who's open to, okay, cool, like you can borrow people from departments, you can use this, you can use county temp, but you can also go over here to really like meet the needs of the office at the time. And then the ones that struggle don't have that kind of flexibility, and it makes them kind of have to sit in this one like lane that makes it actually very difficult. If it's like the timeline when they can onboard temp, or they're only able to use this one form of surging, it makes it really, really tough for those election officials. So for those election officials who have the autonomy and the ability to troubleshoot for their office, like it's really great, and they're able to really address it.
Anything to add there, Anita or Allison?
I know the other thing is really strong collaborative relationships with departments, because you don't want to have just one or two methods of surge staffing. You want to be able to have a variety of different methods, and you want to make sure that those collaborative relationships really help you, especially if you don't have a lot of money, don't have a lot of people resources. How can you do that? I know in local county government, that's just the reality. So you've got to think innovatively, think out of the box, and strong relationships are very important, as well as documented procedures and repeatable onboarding systems. So you're going to be onboarding people quickly. You want to have documented onboarding as well as exiting strategies too, which include debriefing after the process, because so many times you've got these people who are so excited and they've worked so hard, and then it's done. And that retention element could be in there if you did a good debrief with folks.
I love the idea because I think to your point, Anita, most folks don't think about debriefs for temporary staff, right? It's almost like a part of the contract is that there won't be a debrief. This role is temporary, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that's a really valuable insight to pull out. Let's talk about one of the most exciting conversations in any conversation we can have, which is job classifications. Uh, I hope we don't lose half of our audience because I really do think that this is the most important thing that we can talk about. When it comes to job classifications, how would you suggest, and we can start with anybody, but how do election officials or folks who serve in election offices, how do they sell their roles effectively? How do they advocate for themselves through those job classifications? What does that look like?
Well, Anita's the expert here. I will say,
Yeah.
before passing the mic back over to Anita, that I think what not to do is to wait for your HR office to come do it for you. And, we had actually several occasions when we were doing interviews for this report where people said, well, yeah, the HR office came out here a couple of years ago and they were looking at all the job classifications and nothing really changed. And yeah, I think my job description is pretty outdated. But you've got to take the initiative and you've really got to do the work of analyzing the work that goes into your job, that goes into creating those job descriptions, working with your partners, whoever you've got available to you in terms of HR expertise. But it has to come from analyzing what those actual parts of the job are that you're doing and the skills that are needed to do the work in order to be successful at it. Anita, I'll let you elaborate from there.
What I see a big problem with the compensation and classification studies with the elections group in multiple jurisdictions I visited is the folks would write, they would say, I'm working so much harder. I'm like 3 times as busy, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. That if your work is still the same, it doesn't matter. Your reclassification is not going to go through. What I tell people to do is partner with human resources, have them come into your offices, talk to your folks, do a job analysis. And the first step is documenting how the work has evolved, because the work 5 years ago in elections is totally different than it is now. There's so many more complex things that you deal with. Cybersecurity, the increased complexity of jobs, independent judgment, supervisory responsibilities. When you have these surge staffing, technical expertise, especially you see many jurisdictions who had used to have like customer service reps, and they were all classified like that. And now you actually go in and talk to the people who are doing the jobs, and they're IT specialists. So you need to make sure that those jobs, you analyze the specific roles that people are playing now, not 5 years or even 2 years ago. And then also look at project management, look at the outreach and public communication that folks do, and then look at the risk that they manage, especially the operational risk with things like cybersecurity and things like the public scrutiny of the workforce that and the decisions that you're making, especially with a lot of these legislation changes and regulation changes that happen so quickly, and responding to them.
Absolutely. Lynn, anything to add here?
I think, that the compensation, like teaching yourself about classification and compensation is really important. So when you go into a conversation, you can be, really like, hey, this is what I've already done from the measuring of skills, but also like, oh, maybe the county HR is like, well, all we're going to do is compare you to other counties like near you. And you can really identify really quick, whoa, slow down. No, that's not the best way to do this. None of the counties around us represent us or even are close to us. What really thinking about what the best classification approach would be for your office. And, we want comparable election size or whatever it is, to seek that out too. So just really kind of having that background and that knowledge on it when you go into those conversations is going to be really makes you a stronger advocate for your office.
Yeah, let's talk about the fact that, I would think that if I didn't know anything, which I know very little, but if I didn't know nothing, my first thing would be to look at the counties around you and say, okay, Pam makes this, Sheila makes that, Ron makes this, and you're right in the middle of that. Like, well, what are you complaining about? Can you explain to me? And I see Anita shaking her head, saying, "No, no, 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 no." Can you explain to me, as the fake outsider that I'm playing, why that's the worst way to go about this, or a bad way to go about this?
You want to compare with other positions within your local government. Because what I found and what we all found in our research is elections officials are some of the lowest paid positions in local county government. So look for positions like a project manager, a program manager. Look for cybersecurity, IT specialist, IT analyst, senior IT specialist. Look at comparable positions within your local jurisdiction and then with other similar jurisdictions around the country. Don't just do local, do around the country with similar population, size of staff, and make that your comparable if you're going to use some type of comparison, not just the local groups around you.
It's really important there to zero in on the key skills that are important for that job. We used an example, we have a number of different case studies throughout the report, and we used an example in the report. It's Prince William County, Virginia's classification plan. And what you see when you look there is that their training manager is in the same pay grade as a senior paralegal or a senior IT specialist. Their communication specialist is in the same pay grade as an emergency management specialist. Their voter registration coordinator is in the same title as somebody, or the same pay grade as title researcher. So they were really looking at the actual skills that that person employs on the job, and they were able to demonstrate. The chart that we showed is after that county went through an exercise of getting a number of their positions reclassified because they did exactly what we're describing here and focusing in on what are the skills that are really needed to succeed in this job and what are the skills that are needed to succeed in jobs in other fields within the county. And that was a much easier lift for them to just, to get it elevated within the county as opposed to just dealing with the fact that Susie and Bob and Joe and whoever the other names were that you just mentioned earlier too, Jay, were all underpaid.
Excellent, excellent. Not excellent for Susie, Bob, and Joe, but excellent to take a different approach.
And
All
after
right.
one county does it, then another neighboring county has some new comparable positions too, right? If you succeed in
Right.
doing that, then you're also helping your peers when they're looking at comparable positions within the field.
It's like when someone overpays for a house on your street and everybody's very excited.
Exactly.
Well, a little different. Not overpays. Pays market rate. All
So
right.
And it's
wait,
also
Jay.
TJ.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
It's also educating your human resources staff because a lot of times they don't know about this. They have no clue. And so it's you advocating for your positions and developing collaboration with human resources, compensation, classification, the director of human resources, whoever. But so you have a good working relationship.
Lynn?
yeah. So one of our case studies is like a good example, and so I definitely encourage you to like check out the report because we really like emphasize one. She came into a role and she immediately just did a pretty. She went from specialist to analyst, and like even that pivot for her team members like increased their salaries, got on a new band, and was able to get kind of the skills and everything met. So, especially if you have a strong partnership with your HR team, like those little pivots can go a very long way in getting the compensation that you need for your team.
Well, and it sounds like, I mean, beyond having a good relationship, which is essential, having an understanding of the vernacular, right? Like some of the words and terms that you just used, Lynn. Uh, can you speak perhaps to like, is it valuable to speak their language when it comes to having those conversations and building those relationships?
Yes, I would definitely. And that's like the tricky part is that probably each one of your bands and your like are going to look a little bit different in each one of the counties, but Anita, I don't know if you want to speak to a little bit about like just again educating yourself and what is out there and what aligns with the bands that feel more appropriate.
And also, Lynn and Allison and we're talking, you also need to understand the budget process and the finance department, and you have to have allies in your budget department too, because if you don't understand and they don't understand what you do. So if you're like just out on a cliff here, and you're doing your job. And I see these election folks working so hard, but people have no clue what you do. If you all don't speak the same language, then other departments are going to advocate and you're not going to get a share of the pie. So that's why. And the other thing is understanding the compensation and classification pay grades and understanding the different comparable jobs. And so it's educating yourself, but also, as I said, educating human resources and the finance and budget folks about what you do as well.
And you can ask, you can say, what separates a grade 22 from a grade 24? Or, what is it that you look like when you're evaluating whether one of these jobs should fit into this category or that category, so that you can help work with them and not just advocate for yourself, but also really work collaboratively with them to make sure that the staff in your office are classified where they should be.
I just put a couple minutes ago a great resource from Will Adler at the Bipartisan Policy Center. He gathered, I think, over 1,000 job descriptions related to election administration. I'm sure some of them are good. I'm sure some of them aren't good. I'm sure there's room for improvement, room for ideas, but feel free, folks, to look in the chat and take that. Got a few more questions, but I encourage people. I see we've got some questions coming through the Q&A. Kyle's going to come back on in a few minutes and manage those questions. So please use the Q&A. Allison, I know one of your favorite things to talk about is burnover.
Yep.
Can you talk about kind of the connection between excess overtime, like all of those weeks leading up to the election cycle when folks are just putting more into it than maybe they have in the tank, and how that becomes a risk, not just for making errors, but also for being able to stay in the role long term?
Yeah. There's a real, and I know that a lot of our audience identifies with this, and it comes off critical, but we do this. Like we as election officials tend to kind of acquire a little bit of a bravado over how, and we kind of wear it on our sleeves as a badge of honor that we work long hours. And it has been extremely well documented in other fields, whether you're looking at the health sector and medical errors, whether you're looking at truck drivers on the road for long hours. Sector after sector, working long hours has been directly correlated to errors, has been directly correlated to not doing your job well. And so, if there's one piece that in both this report and then in some of the additional research and work that we're going to be focusing on over the course of the next year coming out of the lab, we're pulling those findings out and really talking about the dangers of the long hours that we work in elections and some of the ways that we can approach trying to resolve that. If you're working 50, 60 hours a week for 6 weeks at a time, you're not doing your best. And neither is anybody on your team. And that is the most compelling argument that you can make in getting additional capacity, additional authority to hire more people. But we also kind of have to get over ourselves and our own tendency to just kind of feel that pride of the long hours that we work.
Anita, Lynn, anything about the martyr aspects of election administration?
From my perspective, I think we need to reframe this from not simply emotional resilience, but really it's a burnout when you're looking at organizational systems. And what about chronic understaffing? What about the lack of inadequate management capacity, or excessive overtime, or unclear processes, or lack of support for the election folks? and all of that, just so people feel heard and seen. And many times when you don't feel heard or seen, or you don't feel like you have institutional support to support what you're all doing, it's very frustrating. And you see a lot of burnout. We heard it in our study and talking to folks. So it's also that organizational systems perspective that we need to look at burnout from.
And
Sprints
burnout.
are a thing. I mean, I don't want to, negate the reality that you just need to stay late when, you just got a pile of ballots that showed up and you've got to have them, counted by tomorrow. That's just the way this works. But it's the accumulation of that over time. People who are working long hours need recovery time. Their burnout doesn't happen just because you have a single stretch or a single election where people have had to put in long hours. It happens where you go from just continually stretching your capacity like a rubber band that starts to get fragile to, what we need to do is move to the point where we recognize that these are some systemic challenges and we need to actually add capacity, not just stretch the existing capacity that we have. Or we need to rework some of the tasks. We need to identify other ways that we can complete tasks so that we don't have to ask those long hours of people.
Lynn, anything here?
No, I think they, both Allison and Anita really hit on it. And, what's heartbreaking is you hear from people who really love the job and they did what they had to do because public servants get taken advantage of because we believe in the work and we believe in the importance of the work. And then we get through this tough season of elections and we just get, you just get kind of like a pat on the back, like do it again. And like, that's what leads to burnout instead of like any additional, like, hey, I need more resources so I don't have to have this hard struggle to, continue to do the best work. And those people will leave, they'll leave the profession. So how can you both advocate for yourself and your office to say, hey, yes, we did excellent, but here's why we still need more resources so we can do that again and not feel that just, being taken advantage of.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the pieces of the report, it's actually, I think, the most striking part of the report for me was this idea of developing a national election workforce classification framework. Uh, when I got to review the report, I said, Allison, make that page number one and then go to the title page. She didn't listen. It's okay. My feelings aren't hurt. But Allison, can you talk about that framework and how to what that looks like? What are we talking about when we mention this?
Yeah, one of the challenges that we continually run into when we're comparing anything in elections is the difficulty of comparing large jurisdictions and small jurisdictions that are structured one way and jurisdictions that are structured another. But there's still a certain set of core duties that have to be performed by an election office. And we sort of talk past each other if we're just talking about the job as a whole, or if we dismiss the reality that there are common skills that are required, whether you work in one of the largest jurisdictions in the country where a single task may be divided up among 15 people, or whether you work in one of the smaller jurisdictions in the country where everything has to be done by a single person. So in order to really have a meaningful conversation about our shared needs and in order to make sure that the training programs that we have for elections, make sure that the ways that we really look at these job classifications when we're comparing across jurisdictions, all the different ways that, it's a value to have a conversation outside of our own jurisdiction's boundaries about the workforce. You need to have some kind of a common language. So to create a common language for how we talk and think about the tasks in elections, the skills in elections, that's the conversation that's begun. That's the conversation that triggered some parts of the need for this report to really look at what the skills are, what the duties are that people are performing across the organization and not just in the top job. I want to have Lynn speak to this because Lynn has actually been doing the most work on our team to help inform the development of this. And Lynn, if you wouldn't mind also referencing the work that the EAC is doing on this, that would be amazing.
Yes. Sure. So as Alison described, like a workforce classification framework, is just a way that we can kind of all align on shared language, a way of describing the roles, tasks, knowledge, skills, and levels of responsibilities associated with a function of an office. And so the idea is that no matter the size of the office, no matter where it is, you still have the same functions. And what does that look like? And there are a lot of workforce frameworks out there, that are, really strong. And the comparison that we really lean into is the cybersecurity framework. This is like a very mature framework, but it really has kind of transformed cybersecurity trainings, and how people are skilled into this workforce. And although we're smaller in elections, there's so much that we can learn from it that I think can help share a more united story. And we're excited to hear that, EAC sees the value of this. Their competency wheel was kind of the first step in having these common language conversations. But, like super long term, like it's just, if you look at the cybersecurity framework, it's amazing. Like from K to 12, teaching people processes of cybersecurity all the way through like the senior person running like a corporation of cybersecurity. It covers all the way across. And I think there could be a really great opportunity for elections to have this, and they can use it both at a local jurisdiction, but also for universities, for other trainers, all the way across the board to really get kind of that shared language together.
And then, yeah, this career framework, and the classification framework could also include things like career pathways. So there's formal career pathways, leadership development, competencies and pathways that are aligned with elections, and not just the top officials, but all throughout different positions. And then also things like succession planning. And one of the things I really think is needed is workforce analytics about a lot of this human resources and workforce development. Because if you can't measure it, if you can't see this, can't see the overtime, you can't talk about it. And so if you have some workforce analytics there, it really helps you measure that. But the most important thing is if you've got this stuff, you got the career pathways, you have the leadership development, you have succession planning, training, you got to let people participate. So many times when we went around the country, people said, I want to go to the training, but my region doesn't have any money. I don't have the time, or it's not offered at a convenient time. These are all types of things that we need to think about to be able to make this accessible, because you can have this great classification framework with all this stuff, but if it's not accessible and available and usable so people can easily use it and understand it, then it's worthless. So that was my thing about the framework. It needs to be something that people can access, understand easily, and utilize.
Excellent.
I want to give the EAC a shout out here. I think most of our audience is probably familiar with the EACs. They describe it as the competency wheel. Several years back, the Election Assistance Commission came out with this visualization of all the different kinds of things that, an election office is responsible for. And certainly in my mind, moving from the wheel to a framework is kind of taking that flat wheel and making it more, three-dimensional, in the sense that you've got all of these different skills across your organization, and they're broken down in more or less depending on the size of your jurisdiction and depending on your structure. And I know the Election Assistance Commission is also in the process of pulling together a report they've already sent to their advisory boards on the value and promise of a framework. And I know that they'll be coming out with that as well. So we're very aligned with and interested in working alongside with them on that.
Amazing, amazing. Well, I'm going to turn it back to Kyle because I see we've got some good questions in the Q&A. I encourage folks to continue to ask questions in there. But Kyle, go ahead.
Yeah, no. Seconding TJ, please continue to drop your questions in. We've got a lot of good ones already. I'm going to start big picture here. Somebody's asking, they're listening to this conversation. They're asking, what can clerks and election directors, etc., do to make the election workforce feel respected and supported by the whole of local government? And you've touched on this, but if you could revisit this conversation about educating the other branches of local government, and talking about really making the election workforce feel that support, feel that respected, feel that understanding permeating throughout.
Anita, you want to field that one?
I'll let you start. Because,
Okay.
yeah, I'll let you start on that one and then I'll add to it.
I can.
Yeah,
you want-
it's
Or you
I'm
want-
sorry.
oh,
Okay.
Lynn wants to. Lynn's eager to
Okay.
jump
I was
in.
well, so my biggest thing is one thing I was gonna say is I really hope this report is a tool that you can use to help do a better, like be able to explain in an easy way kind of the complexity of the workforce. As someone who came in from different public sector analysis, for me, it was really eye-opening. And I think that a lot of people potentially in county and local government don't always are able to see this. So our hope is this is a tangible resource for you to use. Sorry, Allison. I was just like, I hope my fingers are crossed.
Yeah,
Well,
and I guess two responses on that one. We are also, so this report is 44 pages. Sorry, we had a lot to cover. But we are going to be coming out with some one-pagers that kind of pull apart pieces of this. And so if there's a particular part of this where you'd like us to work with you and help develop some materials that are going to be particularly, you think, valuable in your jurisdiction, certainly reach out to us. But in terms of the work of pumping up your staff, the work of communicating to external audiences and stakeholders, that's a job too. That's a whole task. That requires its own capacity for you to kind of, take seriously the needs of your office and figure out how you're going to be able to meet those. And so when you are sort of pulling together your workforce plan, treating some of these workplace culture things as a need to have and not just a nice to have is really important. And I'll segue to Anita on that. I stole that line from her.
and one thing that I think was really important is to partner with your administrators and allow employees to volunteer for election positions. So they can take part of their day to be a closer or participate as an election judge. So have them, so your employees then get that experience and they're allowed to volunteer and get paid for it, whether it's working with IT or IT support or driving or doing whatever it may be. But having your employees and your managers and really have that support from your top administrators to have them take off during your early election or your general election and get involved as a volunteer and support you. And the other thing is bring in people into the election. So if you can have different seminars or let people know what you do and different roles that you do, because I'll tell you, a lot of people in local government, as I said before, have no clue about it. They just see the voting and that general election voting, whatever. And they're like, okay, that's it. They don't see all the process that goes before. So maybe invite people in and have tours of that. That's another thing that some local jurisdictions do that's very helpful. And the volunteering aspect and really the encouragement and the pay to get involved is something else that I've seen in other local jurisdictions.
We used to call that the light bulb moment, where people would get just enough of a glimpse under the hood to realize that they had no idea how complicated elections really are and how much work goes into them. I think, yeah, I'll let you go on with more questions, Kyle, before we can
No,
talk
I
about
mean,
this one all day.
I think we can, and we've got a lot of questions to that end. We actually had Professor Paul Gronke was commenting on the idea, Anita, that you raised of a tour, and specifically says, I'm wondering if this should be a special kind of tour. A lot of jurisdictions currently do tours for the general public that are promoted as a way to advance trust and integrity and communicate outwardly about what does the election office do, come in and see it. But it seems this idea you're suggesting that this tour could include some kind of the documentation that you've assembled in the report, an organization chart, employee or staff descriptions, so that the decision makers on the tour can better understand those complexities themselves. So not just here's how we run elections tour, but this is a staff workforce tour. Come in, come understand. Does that align with what you've been talking about?
And we did that in Montgomery County government. I know we had tours of not just elections, but Montgomery County, Maryland. I was the training director for 15 years there, and we brought people into all different departments. And we had seminars, but then we also had tours of different facilities, and people like just were mind boggled about the work that some of these different departments did, because you just are so involved in your own job, you just have no idea. Sometimes you just kind of siloed in local county government sometimes. So taking off those blinders really is very helpful.
Yeah, no, awesome. Paul's giving a little shout out in the chat, so I got distracted by that, but yes, good. No, this seems continuing this line of questioning around this idea of how to operationalize educating the others in your county. We have a county election official here noting that their county HR refuses to consider supervision of a temporary extra help staff when evaluating full-time employee classification. They also note that the regional salary surveys in their state are inaccurate or seem to be inaccurate in their view because they don't understand the different ways that each county is using their staff. And they also just, to them, it seems apparent that the HR staff in their neighboring counties are making the same kinds of mistakes of not comparing like positions to like positions.
We've seen that a lot. And that's why we're saying, go outside of your regional area. Go and find some comparable counties nationally.
Well, let's talk about the supervision of temporary employees piece, because I think that is a really common problem in elections. And I think it's one of the messages that we as a community are needing to bring to our human resource partners. And that, as we've had some of our partners see the value of it, maybe we can work with you and with others to help amplify that, the way of thinking about it. And I think what I've seen is that where that comes from is because we're still kind of trapped in this idea that elections are like one day a year, right? And so the supervision of temporary staff can't possibly be a very large part of the job. And so I think it's really incumbent on us to demonstrate that it is. And some of that is, maybe shifting the emphasis less away from, well, how many days of the year are we talking about when these temporary employees are being supervised, to what are the consequences for the election if these employees are not supervised well? What are the skill needs that the people who are supervising these individuals need to have in order to be able to supervise well and make sure the work is done? What does accountability look like if somebody's a frontline employee and they've never had the opportunity to learn the skills of supervising, but they're thrust into it? Well, then how can you hold them accountable for not doing a great job of something that they never had the opportunity to take the classes and to learn? And so it's really, where we link it back to the skills, we link it back to the consequences, we link it back to, okay, if the answer back is, well, then you shouldn't be giving those duties to a frontline employee, then that's where you come back and say, okay, let's talk about the capacity elsewhere in the organizational chart. Then if I can't have a frontline employee doing supervision, then I guess we're going to need to add a position for a supervisor for that section. And that's where the conversation, I think, needs to go.
And I tell people also look outside of human resources. So start to collaborate with your council members, so your council members understand and your administrative team understands what you do. So you're going to need to advocate for yourself, because sometimes you may have people in different roles who may not understand it, or they just may say, forget it. This is what we're doing. So you might have to jump out of that box and go to other people. And especially now, for many, this is an election year. Vote people in who are going to be supporting, and find out about those candidates who are going to be supporting a lot of the stuff that you're doing as well. And you are nonpartisan. We know that. But it's important that you have collaborative relationships with people throughout your organization at all levels. So your council members, your county or city administrators, your human resources team, your budget team. So if one person says no, it doesn't mean you can't get through another door.
I think also this ties back to some of what Anita was talking about earlier in terms of really, documenting the needs that you have and where those needs have come from. Documenting how positions have evolved, this sort of situation where you've got, not suddenly, but you've got frontline employees who are having to supervise temporary employees to do a bunch of tasks. Well, those tasks they've changed over time. And so when the job description was written for that frontline employee, you didn't have the complexity, perhaps to the task. And so you've responded over time by using your available staff to perform duties that were outside of the grade for their original job. So that takes the conversation back to what were the new needs, what has changed that now prompts not just saying, oh, you're assigning that task to the wrong person, but saying, well, we have a new task that we needed to assign to somebody. So help me figure out where in our organization we can now assign this and add the capacity to meet. Maybe it was an unfunded mandate that was imposed on us 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but we never had the opportunity to respond in our staffing structure to that new task, that new need.
Right. We are starting to run a little bit short on time, so I'm just going to ask a couple of additional questions here. But we've got a lot of great questions in the chat, and I'll share an email at the end that you can continue sending those questions, so we can be sure to pass those along. But we've got a few folks asking about your all's plan for this coming year. A lot of the report is focused on work you did during 2024. Is there potential for UMD to undertake a similar effort for the 2026 elections? And/or just generally, what else can we expect from the Election Resilience Lab in the coming months?
We're not doing another big study in 40 counties this time, but what we are doing is working with a couple of pilot jurisdictions to really focus in on some of the questions that have been raised here, and trying to apply some of this research from other disciplines to the tasks of elections. Lynn or Anita, do you want to clarify or add?
No.
And then I think we'll wrap things up here at the end with just kind of the one big takeaway, or what's one thing that somebody watching today could do to act on the findings of this report, or anybody who's listening, what's the one thing you want them to take away from today as they're going about the rest of their afternoon?
I'll start.
Yeah.
We have 4 recommendations in the report, but they're really one. And they are, number 1, to evaluate your workforce capacity, clarify your skill gaps and your development needs, examine your workplace culture, and then working with your partners in your jurisdiction, develop a formal action plan. And the one thing that I think people can really do is sit back and examine those 3 things: their capacity, their skill needs, and their culture, where their signs of strain are showing, and where they can begin to resolve those problems, and who they need to work with in order to build a plan both in the short term and the long term to, what is it that you've just kind of been accepting as something that is the nature of elections, and how do we get to yes on actually addressing them?
Anita or Lynn, anything to add?
Well, this is just something, we had a tremendous outpouring of research, and we had many people who worked on this report. So I'm not the only human resources person who worked on it. Vivian Shaw was an excellent researcher, and I know we had many other people. So I want to just give a shout out to all of those people who contributed, whether you were one of the people we visited, got research with, interviewed, or one of the people who contributed. That collaboration is exactly the kind of thing that we need to continue. Because the more you get out of your silo and start working together, the better results you'll have. So I just wanted to thank everyone for the effort that went into this report.
Lynn, you get final say if you want.
I mean, that was a pretty good closing. A lot of the people that went to the jurisdictions were former election officials. And they help, they built this report. So it's just been a pleasure to work with all of them, to work in partnership with everyone we did for this report. And yeah, it's been a pleasure being here today.
Well, and it's been a pleasure having all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to everybody who's in attendance. Thank you for joining us today or listening to the recording after the fact. We really appreciate you. We really appreciate all of our panelists for this great discussion. TJ's been dropping resources, including this new report in the chat throughout. So please do check out those links. And we plan to keep hosting Books and Ballots. So stay tuned for June and beyond. If you want and have not already, sign up for the newsletter. We'll continue sending more information about this and other things in the world of useful research for election officials. As always, our inbox is open. If you have any additional questions, if you had a question in the Q&A that didn't get asked, or if something occurs to you later as you're going about your day, that email is support@readyfortuesday.com. And with that, we'll say thanks and see you next time.